Hi. So this is now episode 8. I've got the pleasure of Mike joining me for this conversation. And the conversation that we're going to bring to us today is looking at good and bad stress. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Dave. Thanks for having me.
And if you wouldn't mind being so kind to give us a little bit of an introduction of who you are, that'd be much appreciated.
Yeah, my name's Mike Longthorn. I'm a counsellor and a coach. And I've been in this area for about 3 years now.
Perfect. So stress, and obviously we've spoken briefly before, and you kind of understand a bit of my journey and where I've gone with stress. And I did mention about the heart attack before. What I'm trying to achieve by this podcast is I'm trying to show managers that there is a supporting arm for everybody. And I don't believe in any industries of management. I think there's very limited support there. And the major reason why I've put this together is because of the journey that I went on and the stress. And the stress got to me and I let it build up and it was horrendous and I popped. So yeah, it's just really just for what I'd love to do. I'd love to get ahead of everybody to not do this journey I've been on. And if I could help them to sort of go, there's a flag, or let's do that way, rather than going, yeah, okay, everything's fine, like I did. I'm all right, yeah, okay. And then all of a sudden you pop and then, yeah, you end up in a hospital, which isn't great. Just if you can get into the swing of it, yeah, what's your thoughts on stress generally?
Yeah, and going back to that conversation that we had, Dave, about your heart attack, it's interesting, and you framed it there as it happens for many people. They might think they're coping with stress, not actually understanding what those factors and what they look like and what we can be made aware of to understand that we're going through stressful periods in our life and it is affecting us. The work that I do in counselling, I work with a lot of survivors of sexual abuse and sexual violence. So clearly there's a lot of stress that has come from those traumatic experiences. And also in coaching as well, I work with stress quite a lot. And I think it's important to understand that when we're in a stressful state, we're almost in that fight or flight, that, as they know, that sympathetic mode, which means that we're in a situation where we're trying to respond to things which can be extremely stressful, and at the same time put us into a state where we're not operating in a response that we want to. So, we can be extremely stressed and make decisions which, if we weren't stressed, if we was in that parasympathetic mode, that rest and digest mode, we'd have more of an ability to make a decision that's going to be beneficial.
Yeah, and that's that. I've mentioned sort of previously, that the leaders I look up to are the ones that take a step back, can sort of see the wood through the trees and actually take a breath, relax, look at the situation and go, right, calmly, take your time, and then they'll see what the problem is. The problem that I used to have, and still, it's not completely gone, is that, you're running, you're on, a lot of construction sites that I dealt with, it's constant. It's a barrage of stress. I put a post out on LinkedIn talking about my typical day. I'd get up at 5:30 in the morning. I'd go have a breakfast, coffee, whatever it was, get the train, go to work, have another coffee, have a toasty or whatever, hit the stress at 7:30 after doing the commute and the tube, getting into work and just getting slammed by people straight away. And then having and the issue with a site manager, you kind of get it from every angle. You get it from the guys below, you get it to the guys from the side, you get it from your guys above you. It's just all on you and it's constant, and you're firefighting and you're making decisions so fast because it's almost like a bit of a knee jerk, and it's also sometimes you've been burnt. The typical saying, if you put your hand in hot water, you put it back quick, don't you? And you're very hesitant to go back into that again. And once you've been hit with stress in certain situations, you are reluctant to then go back into them situations. And then that is your parasympathetic, or he's parasympathetic, isn't it? Which one's
Sympathetic
the
is
heightened?
the kind of fight or flight. Yeah, parasympathetic, the rest digest. And yeah, it's really interesting what you're saying. Yeah, you're framing that journey to work with the coffee, with the speed, with the kind of general kind of like really high awareness. And that is just building on stress. And, we have that coffee to try and regulate ourselves. But actually, in many ways, it's just raising anxiety, especially if we're in that state of kind of concern and worry right there. I think I always, when I work with clients, I find it really interesting when I hear about stress and how we can maybe cope with stress. And I use the analogy of it's kind of like a cup of water. And if you think of the stress being the actual water in the cup, and the amount of kind of peace we've got left is the gap, is the air at the top. So it's about how can we get more space in that glass? How can we reduce the water, reduce the stress? And I think mitigating factors such as, breathing you mentioned as well, getting out in nature, better sleep as well. I think sleep is the foundation to so much. And I think it's so easy to forget these things when we're really rushed because it sends us in the opposite direction. We think we need to be busier, doing more, less sleep, less rest. And ultimately that just creates more stress. And it's about how do we step back from that? How do we have the confidence to step back and not keep riding on that wheel and creating more and more stress?
Well, that wheel is what done me, and the sort of, it's probably a good point to actually explain what happened with the heart attack. So I was doing martial arts to probably doing about 4 hours a week of quite intense training. The night before the heart attack, I was done an hour to 2 hours worth of training, quite intense, after a full day of work, and we had 2 small children. As in a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old. Then probably coming back to home, maybe having a beer, then trying to go to bed. And obviously, I've now know about your HV, which obviously, having a good night's sleep, a deep sleep is so important. But at the time I didn't. So with the fighting, the stress of work, the alcohol, the children, my sleep must have been absolutely all over the place. So I had that the night before. I knew that I was going to have a altercation with a plumber the next day. He was fiery. I knew it was going to be a fiery meeting. I was concerned about the meeting. I don't like confrontation. I try and avoid it, but I knew I couldn't avoid this one. Done the routine that I said earlier, get up, coffee, go da 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 da. I went to have this confrontation with this guy about 9 o'clock. And it was as I thought. It was a massive, it wasn't a massive, but I had an adrenaline drop. So literally my stomach, the pit of my stomach went. And that's why my body's very related to my stomach. If I'm unhappy, I don't eat. That's all the second brain or whatever people want to describe it as. But I had a massive adrenaline drop. And I just went, well, okay, yeah. The argument got heated. It didn't get violent, but it was raised. We were raised. We were walruses on a beach, just, rearing up with each other. It settled down. I then went off. I went to the shop. I got a can of Coke and a bacon roll. Great diet on top of everything that's gone on. And then I went to the supermarket and I just felt this weird feeling in my hand. Googled it on my left hand, Googled it, and yeah, heart attack. And then it all changed. I won't go into the rest of the details, but yeah, it was a difficult time. But all stress induced, absolutely all stress, and all of them just added, and then you go.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think for many people, it does take that really shocking moment to sort of switch us back into like understanding how fragile this life is, and maybe tomorrow isn't guaranteed. And actually, what can I do now to show that care for myself? And, I sometimes see in my coaching and counseling, it's about it's kind of about self-care and being respectful for yourself, because I think we lose that along the way as well. And when we can respect ourselves, when we can be compassionate towards ourselves, we can then start to show ourselves the care and thinking, hang on a minute, now I want to get to bed at a good time. I want to exercise. I want to make the right choices nutritionally, because I'm respecting my body and I'm being compassionate to myself. And also take care of the strain that we've got psychologically as well. So I think a lot of the time we can look at, these situations that we put ourselves in hindsight. It's great, isn't it? We can see maybe the choices that we've made, but I think, and I'm a big believer that situations like what you've gone through, Dave, at the time, it sounded like an horrendous situation, something I wouldn't wish on anybody. But in actual fact, if we can dig a bit deeper than that, it's probably a little bit of a gift. It's sent you on a different direction.
100%. My dad died a couple of years ago, quite young, and he wasn't in tune with his health. And the reason why he passed away is because he had a prostate problem that he didn't admit to. So he wasn't aware of his body, denial. He ended up going on a horrendous journey, getting sepsis, because he wasn't aware of himself. And the heart attack, plus everything made, right, okay, I need to look after myself. And actually what you were just saying, it also reminded me of having young children. And I hear this a lot from wives and women. They say, oh, I lost myself and I'm really, really looking forward to finding myself again. Well, actually, fact, there's a major part of being a modern man where we lose ourselves. So, I was training, that was a luxury, but other than that, there wasn't anything for myself. Everything was committed to either work, the children, and that was it. There wasn't actually time for myself. And like you say, you do need that time to reflect. You do need to go for a walk and just have a breath, and I think that's quite important. Learning your body, learning the signs is really important, but also just having that time for yourself and just go, look, I need 5 minutes, admit to your partner, look, it's getting to me. I'm about to pop. I need to go for a beer. I need to go for a beer with the boys and just talk crap for an hour. I still love you. I still love the kids. I just need a break. I need some sanity. I need to talk about football or whatever it may be. I think that's important. And I lost all of that. And that's probably why I popped.
Yeah. And you touched on something there. I think, connection is incredibly important, and incredibly important to lower that stress, to create more space in that kind of metaphorical sort of water glass analogy I was talking about. Because when we do things like that, it does relieve a lot of that pressure. We're able to be more of ourselves, be more authentic, and and you do get lost in the stresses, in the responsibilities that we've got in life, and I think that does tie into sort of losing ourselves and losing that ability to care for ourselves, because we're caring for others all the time. Where does that leave us? And I think to be able to lean on friends, have those conversations, which, great. I mean, the surface level, but sometimes that's what we need, just to kind of, just to feel better about ourselves, just to understand that actually, life is enjoyable. It's not all about achieving things at work or achieving things at family, looking after people. We've got our own time, and the older we get, I think the more we forget how important play. When I say play, I'm talking about social, any sort of feeling that's going to make us feel like we're having fun, how important play is, because I think we live in a world where it's almost kind of not even mentioned. We get to adults and we think, oh, we shouldn't be playing anymore. And it's so important to build that into life. And that's part of reducing the stress as well.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think it might be an opportunity now to maybe discuss about almost the escapism element. And I know you do a lot of work around alcohol, and I can see why that it is that play, but that play could probably go too far, and it is potentially, if you're not having them open communications and finding that network around you of support and everything's getting to you, I'm going to go for a beer, mate. I'm going to go and drink and, and forget about it. but the knock-on effect for the next day is just, it then carries on. And, you know, I barely drink now, to be honest with you. And I know the feeling. If I've had a lager or a good couple of glasses of wine, I feel that the next day, you know.
Yeah, and I think sort of going back to what we were saying about sleep, you know, sleep is, I believe, fundamentally the thing, you know, if we don't sleep, everything else stacks up negatively. And, you know, there's nothing more affects sleep than a beer or two or three or four. Because what's happening is as we drink that beer, we're getting sort of a fake GABA put into the system from the alcohol, which sedates us. But then to create homeostasis in the brain, we have an amount of glutamate pushed in naturally. So that creates level homeostasis. Then we go to sleep and we wake up at 3 or 4 in the morning because the GABA, the fake GABA's disappeared, and we're left with a lot of glutamate exciting the system. And that carries on to the next day with the hangover, with anxiety, scared of your own shadow, and all that kind of stuff. So ultimately, when we drink, our sleep is affected. So I work with people from, you know, a full range of drinkers, from sort of light to middle lane to people out of rehab. And I do believe that, you know, it is a level. I was only drinking sort of 20 or 30 units at the end before I went alcohol free 2.5 years ago, but it was having a detrimental effect on me. And I think if you ask anybody to remove alcohol for 30 days, and it sparks an amount of anxiety in them, then at some level, there is an addiction there. And I'm not saying it's a bad addiction, but it's something that we're leaning on, which I think is really interesting. I think it's like a sliding scale addiction. And yeah, I mean, understanding the further we get, that I get away from alcohol, I understand that actually there's no need for it. And there's every different situation that comes along, whereas I used to pair alcohol with, that I get through, that I enjoy just as much, and yet I have the next day that's not destroyed. And as you know, Dave, that gets harder the older we get. The hangovers get worse. The 2 or 3 beers of an evening, you feel it the next day. So there's none of that, and there's none of that kind of general sort of feeling, sort of 70-80% of what you can be when I think you remove alcohol, then you kind of hitting that 100%. You got your sleep, everything's in line. It's just understanding and learning to understand what life looks like without alcohol, because it's so ubiquitous.
Well, COVID was my alcoholism, and I don't know whether I was an alcoholic or not, but I definitely had an addiction. And what I think probably happened with most people was they realised they could drink at home. And because of COVID, you know, I started getting a bottle, and then maybe 2 bottles, and then maybe 3 bottles. And it then ended up just being the norm. And it got to the point, I'd done the units of alcohol compared to the government guidance. And I think they talk about if you're up to 50 units, it's excessive drinking or something along them lines. And all I was doing, I was having a beer with my dinner. I was having a glass of wine before bed every night, which, you know, my dad would always do that, you know, glass of wine and a beer with your food. And then at the weekends, have a few more. So I'd probably have, you know, 3 cans of beer on a Friday, 3 cans on a Saturday, maybe a couple on a Sunday, and then a bottle of wine, obviously in the week that I would have had. And then I'd probably have another bottle of wine at the weekend. It's not excessive, you know, on paper, it looks horrendous, but I'm only having a beer. But I noticed that I was getting twitchy when I didn't have beer in the fridge, or I didn't have wine in the wine cellar. I haven't got wine cellar. But I started feeling a bit anxious about it. And I'm like, whoa, this isn't good. You know, I'm starting to become reliant on something. And it was, to me, I think it was a bit of it was a de-stressor. For me, it was that I just wanted to unwind. And I think that's probably the common phrase you might hear quite often. You know, I just having a glass of wine, just unwinding after a stressful day, you know. And going back to my career, it was horrendous. It was so stressful. You know, it was from my wife would never walk in my shoes and understand what the pressures I was under constantly. It was aggression. It was fast. It was nasty. Everybody was out to set you up and trip you up because they had their own agenda, you know, and it was just intense. So a glass of wine, a couple of beers for me, it's fine. It doesn't mean anything, you know. But it was quite scary how addictive it become, you know, and the fact that I needed it. So again, another fly. I live in the sticks. Far too much of a farmer's land. Lots of flies.
Some small drawbacks there, Dave, but I'm sure it's all brilliant other than that. It's interesting you bring up that whole kind of release and anxiety and kind of like relaxing the off switch, and I do hear that a lot. And when people come to me, it's like, oh well, yeah, because I'm anxious and I want to reduce that stress on the end of the day, so I have a drink. And it's getting to understand that yes, it will switch it off, and yes, it will turn it off for 20 minutes, an hour, 2 hours. But the next day you're paying for that. You're borrowing that kind of that in the moment time to be worse the next day. And it's making people understand that when they step away from it, actually you can perform so much better because you haven't got that added anxiety. Now, alcohol doesn't cause anxiety, but it makes it a lot worse. So yeah, it's kind of helping people understand that. And yeah, and when they see the benefits working closely on a daily basis and during the sessions, and they see the differences, it's quite motivating then to think, actually, do I want to just switch off at night, or do I want to process emotions, sit with those emotions? Because there is a benefit in not having to bury that stress with alcohol, actually sitting through it, dealing with it, because that gains confidence, that gains self-belief in yourself that you can deal with tough stuff. And you go into the next day more confident because you've processed it. And yeah, I see that a lot.
Yeah. So a big factor of yours must be, and probably part of my journey, and probably good for the people that are listening in, is that, yeah, okay, now you've taken out something that can be quite detrimental. And I have to say, from my journey, I won't quit alcohol because I think it's got a place. You know, like what I was saying earlier, for me personally, you know, I need to go out with the boys and have a beer and have an unwind. You know, that social network actually out trumps the headache the next day. I know I'm going to have a headache. I know I'm going to be a horrible, grumpy dad for a day. But you know what? I needed to let that gas off because I was getting a little bit, you know, the family's intense, the work's intense. I just needed a little blow off, go out, have some fun. And then I know the repercussions. But the next time I have a beer, I have to weigh up that calculation and just go, is it worth it? Do I really need this? Probably not. You know, and I'll have as we know now, like alcohol-free lager and Guinness and things like that are really good. You know, you can still have that whole thing as long as you're confident. And this is again, I'm getting with age, I'm forming that confidence that, you know, I can have a social community around me where I don't need to drink alcohol. I can be me. I can be fun. And I think I was listening to one of your podcasts about this. You know, the fact is that, you know, when the alcohol gets taken away, people sometimes just feel a little bit lost, and you are lost for a bit until you find your true self, and then you just be proud of yourself and just go, yeah, this is me. If you don't like it, do one.
Yeah. And I specifically work with introverts. I believe I'm kind of more introvert and extrovert as well. So my experiences, as well as having the training and counseling and coaching, kind of help my clients navigate that world being alcohol free. And I always say to my clients, it's not the alcohol that we crave, but it's the state change that it gives us. So especially for introverts, we find ourselves, when we remove the alcohol, we might find ourselves too quiet, not being involved like we used to. So it's actually relearning what that looks like, being our authentic selves. And when we can find things that intrinsically sit with us, that do give us that state change, that don't involve alcohol, then we can get that release. We can get that feeling of, I need a release. I've had a bad day, family, stress at work, whatever. I'm going to lean towards this thing that isn't alcohol, but it aligns with me. It's my true kind of feelings of what I want to do. And we kind of pull towards them. We use psychometric tests to understand people's character strengths. And from that, we can then understand kind of what activities, interests, hobbies would kind of work with that client, and really encourage them to try these things. Because sometimes it's things that wouldn't have even come into their sort of mind or consciousness to try.
And that falls nicely in line with what I'm trying to do with this podcast. You know, I'm trying to get on this particular one, you know, how do we deal with stress? You know, and it's the same situation for what you've been telling your guys, you know, where's the coping mechanisms? What can you do to de-stress yourself? You know, and get yourself on a, you know, like what I said, the strong leaders that I look up to are the ones that can actually take that breath, control their emotions, look at facts for what facts are, you know, just look at it in the cold light of day and make a decision. And they're the leaders that we need to strive to be, you know, and the ones that get stressed out and, oh God, and snappy to people, you know, and just, oh no, you better not go and see Dave round the corner. He's losing it today. They're not leaders. That's not leading. You're bullying people into being too scared to talk to you, you know, because you're not handling the stress, you're not handling the environment well. So, yeah, I think we need to start, bringing in things to my guys that can actually help them deal with stress. So, yeah, if you've got any tips or tricks on how to establish what they can use would be great.
Yeah, I think when we're in a stressful state, as just going back to the start of the conversation, we find ourselves in that fight or flight mode, which means that our frontal cortex, our front part of our brain, which does all the rational cognitive thinking, kind of flips off, and we're in that old mammalian part of the brain where the fight or flight part is. So we make decisions without fully thinking about them. So I always say to clients, if they are finding themselves stressed, and it might be for a meeting, as you mentioned, Dave, then you've probably heard this, but that breathing, and there's a really simple one to remember. Just you breathe in and you breathe out for longer than you breathe in. So breathe in for 4 seconds and out for 6, for example. And what that does is it's kind of like bottom up control. So normally our brain is in charge of our body, but when we use breathing, we actually allow our body to control our brain. So by physics, we're in a stressful state, but by use breathing, we can then put our frontal cortex back online, because what the breath work does is it relaxes us. So breathing out for longer than we breathe in, it relaxes. If you look at any animal, a dog, for example, or a cat, as it's going to sleep, we'll have that really big breath out because it's just regulating its system. They do it naturally. And we can forget that, because when we get stressed out, we're breathing really high in our chest, and it's short breath, which continues us and perpetuates that, you know, it gets blood to the extremities. It's ready to move, ready to fight, ready to fly or fight. And it's ready to make a decision. So it's about reversing that. And breathing is an excellent technique in reversing that. And I also think another one that I work with clients is engaging the senses to get us in the moment as well. So I think if we can use all our senses and maybe name 5 things that we can see, or, you know, 4 things that we can hear, 3 things that we can smell or touch, and 2 things that we can smell, and 1 thing that we can taste maybe, because what we're doing there is we're putting ourselves into the moment, because anxiety lives in the future. So if there's anything we can do to get in that moment, we're gonna push anxiety aside. You know, but naturally, the natural thing is when we feel anxious, when we feel worried, is to push it away. But just in the actual action of pushing it away, we attract it. So it's about getting in the moment. It's about understanding what can we do to get in that moment. And there's all sorts of tricks. There's kind of like, I don't know, counting backwards from 1,000 in multiples of 3. You know, naming animals beginning with A, B, and C, because it's tricking our brain into doing something else other than thinking of the future, where the anxiety, where the worry, you know, what's this guy going to say when I go up to him and I talk about this thing? Actually, you know what you want to say. It's the fear. It's you getting in your own way that's causing the problem. So in order to play these tricks with our mind, to do this breathing, to do these cognitive exercises, it takes us away from that fear. We already know what we want to say, but to do those exercises brings us away from that anxiety. So I think those are some of the things that I would recommend to work with clients.
And that's really good. The issue that I've got is I know about box breathing. I know about holding my breath longer than letting it out. I like the present thing, which I hadn't thought of before, but it's implementing them. And I think what we need to do is, I think the guys need to understand the early triggers of when you need to bring that in. So my classic maneuver of when I'm getting stressed out, my throat closes up. I don't know why. It's something from my childhood. It's some trauma that I've had, but I'll start losing my voice. If I go into a public area like a pub and I'm not confident, my voice goes so low and I can't talk. My vocal glands or vocal cord or whatever, it just gets so restricted. That's my trigger. I know at that point I'm starting to feel the stress, and it's not a conscious stress, as you say. It's your parasympathetic or sympathetic nervous system kicking in. But that's the signal for me to go, right, Dave, you're getting a bit sweaty palmed here. Take the breaths or do that. And I think that's important because, as I say, in the best will in the world, most people know what to do. The old days used to be sort of breathe into a brown paper bag. It's always been out there, but it's trying to get the guys to buy into it and they need to first, I think, understand them triggers. When's it happening to you, and then take the next stage.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Dave. Absolutely. I think without that, and I think it's only an experience that we can understand that. So I guess the questions would be is if people did find themselves in those stressful situations, just immediately afterwards or as soon as you can afterwards, think back what happened, where did you feel that stress? What did it look like? And as you say, for you, it was in your throat. For me, it used to be kind of getting sweaty and stuff. And when I know that, I could then implement those techniques because you're right. It happens and it's too late because you're already in fight or flight. Therefore, you can't do anything about it. So it's tracking it back. And when you know there's early signs, absolutely right. Then it's time to take action. Really good point.
Another good thing that I'd done. So I've had quite a stressful year. It's been sort of getting the business going. There's been a lot going on. Financially, there's been a lot going on. It's been getting to me. I made a couple of sort of bad decisions. It's just not been easy. I'm through it all now, and it is absolutely brilliant. But what got me through it, which is a technique, I'm going to call it the Dave. Basically, what it was that when you're in the middle of that stress, you feel like it's never going to end, and you feel like it's just the weight of the world's on you, and it's really, it's heavy. So what I done is I sat down and I wrote out every time I felt the same like this in my past, and actually worked out what was the repercussions and what was the end after that. Was the stress worth what the pain that you put yourself through? And I had 15 major incidences in my life that caused the drop in the tummy, the sleepless nights, the stress, all of that overwhelmingly was on top of me. I wrote down what it was, how long the emotions lasted for, and what was the final outcome. And every single one of them, without fail, was me overly worrying about the situation and never evolved.
Right.
It was, I had a car crash that was my fault, really. Nobody was injured, but it was my fault, and the stress that I was under because of that, it was so intense, and it was sleepless nights. It was concerned I didn't tell anyone. I kept it to myself, Outcome of it, I've improved my driving and there wasn't any big repercussions to it. So
Right.
I put myself through a major stress, self-induced, on that situation. And actually, there was nothing come of it. Actually, I improved myself. I've become a better driver. I've become this, I've become that. Loads of situations in that, 15 of these, what at the time are life-changing to me. It's so important. My world's going to collapse. Everything's going to be horrific. My life's going to be just horrendous. Each one of them actually turned out to be either null, as in didn't make a difference in the end, or I actually come out of it better.
It's a really good point. I think what that can teach you as well is how important reflection is as well, because I think anybody that's listening to this would have had situations like that, me included. But it's only through reflection that probably you've done and I've done, Dave, that we see actually, was it worth worrying about the situations? Was it worth making those stories up? Because the stress, the huge amount of stress, the majority of stress, if not all of it, was based on a story we were telling ourselves. And when we tell ourselves a story, we give ourselves an answer, which can often be negative as well. We tell ourselves another story and we give ourselves another negative answer, and it spirals out of control. And the thing we've got to be careful of, because we do have a negativity bias, it's a human trait to have a negativity bias, is not to let that get away with us, because we can find ourselves on this thought loop that just doesn't serve us. And I always say as well to clients, to help them as well, we have a negativity bias because we wouldn't be here if we didn't. Because through evolution, it was the people that were more anxious that would get out of the way of predators that would pass their genes on. Hence, we have a negativity bias. But we've got to fight that. We've got to fight that with reflection and understanding. So we can reflect when we have a situation that was a lot of stress. We can maybe journal, understand how it affected us, and really dissect that. What was I making up? What was truthful about this? And then that serves us in a better situation when it happens again.
Yeah, and that also, as you say, we all have that in us, but for the guys that want to be the strong leaders and strong managers, we have to push through that, and it is so important for them to actually analyze it and go, right, okay, that is stressing me out. I am stressed by that, but I'm not going to get burdened by it. I can pigeonhole that problem. And, I'm 50 next month, or this month, I apologise. It's taken me so long to get to this point, that I can actually now look at it. And if the stress feels like it's on top of my shoulders, I can pigeonhole it and to go, this is just a test. It's fine. You'll be fine. Embrace it, encourage it, move on. But if the guys can get that earlier on in their life and actually understand it, they're going to just absolutely zoom through. And actually, it's them little coping mechanisms that are going to make the people hopefully listening to this can become stronger leaders and stronger managers, and that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to give the mechanisms that, at 50 years old, I've been through every eventuality, I think, regarding my career, regarding my life, probably not everything, that's a bit dramatic, but I've been through a lot, and I'm trying to embed it into people just to be able to give them some coping mechanisms that can make them push through and become the best managers. And if they get some of these techniques, and they're going to be that calm character in that stressful situation. Yeah, no, it's good. Positive stress. I mean, let's look at the positives of it. I mean, what's your take on the positive side of it?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that always springs to mind when we talk about positive stress is exercise. That gives us stress. It puts us into that healthy fight or flight mode, and that's absolutely positive. So it's a really good point, Dave, because we think of stress as all negative, and I think stress can evoke action. It can evoke us to take decisions. It's understanding, going back to, part of our conversation of how do we harness that? How do we get ourselves in a position where we're in stress to harness that, to then come up with an outcome that is positive, rather than let it take over us, let the anxiety kind of fill us and create decisions that we don't want to make and actions that we don't want to do. So yeah, 100%. Positive stress is really important. It's just understanding, where does that come from? What's your take on it?
Well, I think it's part of human nature. I think stress is, you can't alleviate stress. Stress makes us human beings. We need stress in our lives. I got to a point probably about 2 years ago that everything was fine. Life was balanced. Work was balanced. Everything was okay. God, I was bored. And that's a weird thing, And I'm not bragging in any way, but with a little bit of help from my inheritance, we managed to pay a mortgage off. It's just a prime example.
Right.
Mortgage for everybody is one of the biggest stresses in life, is that mortgage. I paid mine off. It didn't make me feel any better. It was weird. Like I set this this goal of this massive stress thing was in there, and I paid it off, and I was like, I've done it now. There was nothing, there was no reward there, but the reward of paying that money every month. Yeah, got the money, bosh, got the money, bosh, done. That was almost like, that's what my body, my human nature was pushing for, and I think we need problems, we need troubles, we need stress, because it makes us alive, and if you took it all away, God, life's boring.
Interesting. Yeah, interesting. I think we often, and I think that speaks to that, that thing about understanding that life is going to be great when we get here, when we achieve this, when this happens. And, in doing so, we kind of miss a lot of what life is happening moment to moment. And I think the paying off the mortgage thing, yeah, we expect this relief and this aha moment, this moment of joy and brilliant, and stress is no longer going to be a thing. And actually, it is human nature, isn't it? It is human nature. And it goes back to what I say, because we're looking out for the future. We're looking out for that danger because we have that negativity bias, because it helps us survive. And it's about, as humans are about surviving, procreating and carrying on. So it does really speak to that, like, really deep part of our subconscious that wants to move forward, and it doesn't move forward unless we've got these stresses in life. So yeah, it's important to have those stresses, and I think many of those stresses can come from the goals and the aspirations that we set for ourselves as well. So without those in our lives, we can then feel like, because we want to get to a place where we don't want to stress, well, actually that's a dangerous place to be, because that could be where, like, it could be for some people where kind of depression lives, where being sort of nihilistic and like nothing's going on and a little bit. And yeah, to have those goals, to have that aspiration also is going to come hand in hand with an element of stress.
And I think if you embrace stress as well, if we turn around and go, I'm scared of stress, don't like stress, then you're making stress, hating stress. Like, you're kind of making the situation worse for yourself. You've got to almost embrace it and go, right, come on, challenge me. I dare you to challenge me, and then live up to that stress for that day. And it's, I don't know, maybe I'm a bit of a psychopath, I don't know.
No, I think you hit on a really good point there, because I think in doing so, in wanting that challenge, it's going to create confidence. It creates who we are, because without that stress, without that challenge, we don't become the person that we know we're capable of becoming. So ultimately, we need that stress to test ourselves, to become more confident, to feel like we're adding value, and to feel like, maybe we're adding value because we're bringing money into the house, which is looking after the family, or we've been able to help people, or whatever that looks like. It's going to ultimately make us feel better about ourselves. And without stress, there's none of that.
No. And there's the thing about the journey, isn't it? It's more about the journey than the destination. If you got a teleporter that would take you to any place in the world, you wouldn't appreciate that place because you haven't had the journey to get there. And that is that journey of stress. I've backpacked and done a lot of messing about when I was a lot younger, and that 24-hour flight and like that, I'm there, makes it so much more worthwhile, and actually getting to that point and actually appreciating and enjoying it. And that journey could almost be classed as that stressful journey, that travel journey, to change that word to the stress, and to get to that stress, get to that reward, is really positive thing to do. That's what I think.
Yeah, it's really cool as well, because I love that analogy. The literal journey is the way, isn't it? And I'd never thought of an actual journey before, but you're actually right, because during journeys and the big journeys, they can be quite stressful. I flew to Australia, I don't know, 7-8 years ago. And at the time I was living in East Yorkshire, I decided to fly from Humberside, and there was a delay at Humberside. It ended up taking me an extra day to get on a 24-hour flight, because it was a small little airport to get to Schiphol, and it was a disaster. And there's probably an element of stresses in there. And I think the reason I bring that story up is because I would encourage anybody to listen to this, understanding what are the stresses that we can lower, because it might not be travel, but there are probably things in your life which are creating stress, which you could probably, get rid of. And it's going to lower your amount of stress, which is going to create more resilience and a more ability to act in the way you want to act in stressful situations. So we've got, on the one hand, we've got techniques to lower the anxiety, it makes us feel confident. But on the other hand, we've also got like a reducing of stress, which is in our life, so a mitigation of the stressful factors already. And I think looking at stuff that we're carrying around that we don't need to, then just get rid of that. Something you said on a podcast the other week, Dave, was about the whole people pleasing, which I realised I'm still a people pleaser. And I think that is going to create a bit of stress because it's a misalignment. It's a misalignment when I've got to think about how that person's going to react to the news I'm going to tell them, which was an aha moment for me when I listened to that. And I thought, and when you realise things like that, you can just kind of acknowledge them and think, no, I'm going to be aware of that next time and I'm not going to do that. And therefore, I've reduced my stress somewhat. I've reduced my stress. It's a tiny little bit, but it's reducing my stress. It's been more authentic with myself, which is kind of what I'm about when I'm coaching people. And for me to understand that I'm still people pleasing was an aha moment. But I can reduce my stress there. So there are lots of little bits in life, if we think about it, where we can lower stress, which allows more resilience when we need it.
And there's so much to work on, isn't there? It's so much to talk about, and we keep opening up more and more. And I'm really enjoying this conversation, and we've got hopefully a bit more time to talk about a bit more. I keep getting loads of things pop into my mind. I want to come back to your point just then, but I don't want to forget this point I just want to make is I'm starting to replace stress. So after everything we said, I'm now starting to replace it. I've now replaced it with enthusiasm. I've now got almost the same feeling of stress is actually about my work and about the podcast and the future. I was talking to you yesterday about Tree in the Box Foundation, which I'll be starting hopefully very soon, and that's going to schools and speaking to kids that don't fit into the box of schools. And it's that tree in the box means that the roots of the tree get restricted and they can't fully grow, and I'm passionate about it, and my stress, it's almost giving me the same feeling, passionate about things, I wanted to get this. And the gentleman I was speaking to yesterday was like, you need to make sure your business is successful first, because you can't help these people afterwards. And probably the same with the podcast, really. The business needs to be successful first. All parts of my little jigsaw is this business that me and Shane and Kevin are building. This is all about building an ethical company that gives a crap about their employees and about the clients, and doing it the right way. I've always tried to find the right business and I can't find them. So we are building our own, and it's going to be amazing. And I'm so passionate about it. So that stress has almost gone to one side, and it's now passion. That's keeping me going. The podcast, all I'm trying to do, and it's so frustrating that I can't get the message, this podcast, out to as many people as I hope. My viewing figures are so low because the gatekeeper of LinkedIn's going, we're not going to allow you to get out there, Dave. You're stuck here. And I'm like, the passion I've got for just, all I want to do is help people. I want people to better their lives. And the only way I can do that is by improving them as managers, by me telling my story to help you grow. That's my passion. And then the foundation that will come at the end all bumps off all of it. That becomes, once the business is successful, the podcast name's got out there, then we do the Tree in the Box Foundation, and we support children that are struggling with the academia, the typical life that they get dictated to at school. This is what you must do. We're now pushing for, we can help you out, and all it is just showing that people can be successful if they're not academic, and again, so this I've almost sort of gone from the stress, you need it, you do, but then actually, weirdly, at the end, towards the end of your career, passion pushes it. You want to give something back. That's where you need to be. Sorry, I was a bit self-indulgent. I do apologise.
No,
I get excited. I'm passionate.
Yeah, it's great, and it's a really good point. The stress over to enthusiasm, and it reminds me of, I think we can get anxiety and excitement kind of confused, or we get excited and we feel like anxiety. It's a very similar feeling, anxiety and excitement. And yeah, I think, you know, and I think that speaks to that part about, yeah, anxiety lives in the future, but so does excitement, you know. So excitement is very motivating. Anxiety is the opposite. So it's these kind of, it's almost swapping that energy, isn't it? As you said, stress for enthusiasm, I think you said. And if we're seeing an anxious moment in time that we're negatively ruminating on, actually, what are the positives? Because we've not got a crystal ball. So if we're telling ourselves a negative story, why don't we just swap that for a positive story? Because and then we're more likely to have the outcome. And as you said at the start, those anxieties that those things that we're anxious about in the future, they very rarely happen. And I believe the reason I find people doing this is psychological buffering, so that when the bad thing does happen once in 100 times, we're ready for it. But it very rarely happens. So we go through that pain, that worry, that stress, and we're anxious about it because we're psychologically buffering ourselves. We get there, it's not as bad as we thought, or we're over it. And there's the problem and the worry, and the two different things. If we've got the problem, we might as well just keep it there and not add the worry on top. So I think that adds stress as well, and understanding, and again, it's about reflection and understanding, well, if I'm making a story up in my head again, what could the outcome be? What could the positive outcome be?
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think, yeah, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I think we need to just now think about the listeners a bit and think, right, okay, well, we've talked about some really good subjects. I think we now need to probably reflect on what we've talked about, and hopefully the guys can probably take some more of it back and actually go, right, okay, let's start implementing this. Let's see how this can benefit us in the long run. Do you want to summarize, or should we just go for it?
Yeah, I mean, if I'd summarize, it is a big subject, stress, isn't it? I think when we think of stress, we've kind of, we spoke about that whole parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system, the sympathetic being the fight or flight and the parasympathetic being the rest or digest, is because that's what we can do when we're in a calm, composed state. We spoke about the effects of stress and how we feel when we're working with managers and in environments where, you carry on, Dave, because you carry on.
To be honest, that's such an unfair thing for me to do, and I didn't really mean it. And the only reason why I done it, and we have spoken previously, is that I want you to give some tips and tricks about listening, because you're an expert listener, and I'd actually. It wasn't a test. I didn't mean it. I just blurted it out, and I didn't really mean that. But yeah, listening. It might be a good opportunity if you just give us some tips and tricks, because when we do Toastmasters together, your notes are amazing of how you actually take all the information in, and obviously training as a counsellor. And I think it's a super strength for managers to actually have that ability to listen. And take the relevant information and give feedback back. You know, that is a real super strength, which you've got. I mean, you failed terribly just now, but I set you up.
Yeah. But without failure, there's no success, Dave, right?
That's true.
Yeah. So it was a big summary of that, to go through what I don't know how long, maybe a 45, 50-minute conversation, but with listening, it is a huge part of like the therapeutic or the coaching relationship. And I think there are so many points to listening, and it's about allowing a client or a person that we're listening to for that space, for not jumping in. And silence is a big part of listening as well, because I think it's in the silence that things can land that we've said, and it allows, because we're so quick to jump in on a conversation. When something's said, it's almost like this tennis that we're going on, which we want to say our thing and we want to say our thing, and not to reflect on what the other person's said. So it's about really understanding and digging deeper and asking the open questions of, why and what. And I always think TED is an interesting one to go for. So I'm sure you've heard this, but tell, explain and describe. So when somebody speaks about something, showing genuine curiosity, or, tell me about that, so you say this, describe what you mean when you say that, or explain this. And that really allows the person to feel heard, and it allows them to go deeper on a subject that maybe they're passionate about. And when people feel heard, there is a connection there. So, and when you've got a connection, you've got good communication. So I think a lot of people think about communication is it's, what can I say? What can I speak about? In actual fact, the best communication is when we can listen more effectively and be genuinely interested by that person. For me, I'm not a great speaker, I don't think. And, I find it difficult to do these podcasts because I always find I'm asking the questions and I'm listening to the client. So it is kind of out of my comfort zone to be on this side of the fence, I guess. Because listening, I think, is so powerful. And, the work that I do, whether it's coaching or counselling, it is always around a person-centred modality. And it is quite integrative. So there's many different types of coaching and counselling that I use, but fundamentally it's person-centred, which means that it's about the client. It's about what they're saying. It's about their experiences, because ultimately we all have our own truths. And the reason for this is because we've all lived our own lives and we've all had different experiences. So yes, I know certain techniques we can work with, and I know certain psychological things that we can use to mitigate and lower stress. But ultimately, it's about the person that we're speaking to, because all our experiences through our life have led us to a place where we're at now. And within those experiences, there are truths and untruths, which are true to ourselves and untrue to ourselves. So it's not about me sitting there saying, you need to do this, you need to do that. It's about listening to them and then asking them to go deeper. And ultimately, in many ways, and asking a few coaching questions, they find their own answers to the questions that they've kind of stepped up into therapy or coaching for.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. The people pleaser element for me was that I found I wasn't listening to people because I was worried about their expectations of how I was going to respond. So you be talking right now, and I didn't do this because I have improved, but you talking right now and a while ago, I would have been not listening, but he's going to want me to respond. I need to respond. How should I respond? And I would give you the response that that I thought you expected to hear. I never gave you my true response. Which is crazy, and that's that people pleaser, and that is that element that the courage to be disliked, as we discussed earlier, and I think now that I've gone through that, I now listen better because I'm actually listening to the words you're saying. And I was speaking to someone yesterday, actually, they were talking about their brother-in-law's a barrister. And he said, like, even if you're watching the football with him and you say, yeah, what did you think of that goal? He wouldn't give you a response straight away. He'd wait. Then he'd respond. And he said to him, well, why can you not respond quickly about anything? Because it's very frustrating, he just pauses and then responds. And he said, well, no, surely you want to hear my truth and my true reflection. So I'm thinking about everything that you say. It's like, wow, what a superpower. Because we fill in them gaps naturally, don't we? We fill in them gaps because we're trying to please other people, and actually the super strength is to actually listen, pause, contemplate, then reflect or give that information out. But yeah, I thought that was quite an amazing little thing to hear, actually, But yeah, listening is an absolute art. And I think probably the biggest thing to come out of it is actually being present in the room, isn't it? There isn't a technique really. What you want to do is you want to be in the room with that person, being in the moment. Just listen, man. Like, be interested in what they're saying. Everybody in the world's interesting. There isn't one person that is not interesting. You just need to find what that interest is.
It is quite difficult in many ways because of the society we live in, and in many ways when we speak, people are ready to jump in and say something. And me as an introvert, when I'm in normal conversations outside of a coaching space or a podcast space, and I know that I've not got time to speak, maybe I find myself speeding up and I find myself trying to get the things out because somebody's going to be ready to cut me off. And I think so to listen in a real world environment becomes more difficult because people are ready to jump in, they're ready to say what they want to say, and they don't leave that space. So everything I've said is great and works great in a coaching and a counselling space. But it's also, I really encourage people to do that outside of that space, because when you are listened to, when you are given that space, it feels like, there's something special about it. There's something special about allowed to be heard and understood, and, to say what you want to say.
It's important. And then we were looking at, the coaching environment. You could put it in a meeting environment, that situation, say around me now, I've got 6 dining room tables. If that was full of people, everybody's trying to say their point, and everybody's got an ego, and everybody's got an agenda that they want to put forward. The strong leaders and managers that I've seen are the ones that just hold their voice, and eventually the questions always end up going back to them, and people actually directly ask them, what's your opinion? Because they haven't said anything. They've just listened. They've just taken it on board. They've just looked around. They just let them all get on with that argument. I'm not going to say anything. And the power that individual has of holding that meeting without saying one word is unbelievable.
Yeah, really good point.
So, thank you. I am going to try and summarise, because I think that's unfair just to put that onto you. So I think we kind of originally looked at sort of the, good and bad. We started off with good and bad stress, and we indicated what the bad stress is, and looking at how, that bad stress can affect your evenings, your nighttime, your family life, everything like that, and affect your sleep. And then there's knock-on effect to that. We supplement that stress by adding alcohol and other things into it that are negative to you in the longer run. And if you do add alcohol, there is detrimental effects for you the next day. You need to be aware of it. So then we started looking at coping mechanisms, and basically there's loads of techniques like breathing, like we said, going for jogs, going for runs, things like that take you out of that element. And then we looked obviously at the breathing exercises. We then need to look at potentially them triggers for you to implement the breathing in, things like that, because I personally find that really important, because I know the breathing technique, I know all these things, but it's knowing when to implement them and when they're important, and when your triggers are, and what your triggers, emotional triggers are, or physical triggers, probably more important. And mine is my throat. As I say, it starts closing up. Yours was sweaty, wasn't it? You got a bit sweating hands. So it's just it's bringing them elements in, and then we looked at substitutes, and then we looked at probably the positives towards stress. What is good stress, and the fact too that I went on a self-indulgent rant about my future, my next 10 to 20 years, and how I've substituted stress with more positive feelings and ways to do it. And I won't bore the listeners again about that. And then obviously we just looked at the listening element of it, and which I do think is a bit of a side note, but it is important. I think we brushed on, and I think that I didn't talk about, but this is what I'll probably a very quick few minutes on talking about that inner and outer voice. I think that can bring a lot of stress on to yourselves, because you're either listening and stressing out about what someone thinks or may think, going back to the power of your mind overworking, or that inner voice, and that inner voice can be negative, and you need to have control of that. That probably could be the key to all of this, is actually having control of that voice within, because if you can control that voice and understand your mind, I think you're on a positive directory to try and combat the stress element, or pigeonhole it. You have control of your mind. It's a bugger. Your mind is absolute bugger, and it'll play tricks on you. Like when I was saying that last one about the 5K and the, you can't do this, you can't do that, da 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 da. That's my mind. My mind was having a whale of a time
Mm.
telling me how crap I was. But you can combat that. You just need techniques to do it, and then that will help you manage stress more.
I always think a good technique, just interjecting there, Dave, is, and I say this quite often to my clients, and I'm sure you've heard it, is kind of how would you speak to a person you love, to a person you want to motivate, to somebody else? You would speak with kindness, compassion. You would be motivating. You wouldn't be swearing at them and waving the big stick. And I always encourage people to point that inward, because next time you're having that negative thought loop in your head, think about the damage that's making, because psychologically, and there's plenty of evidence out here that shows that that's damaging as somebody stood next to you saying it. So why do we do that to ourselves? Let's be compassionate, let's be kind, and let's be motivating to ourselves, and understand that if we were talking to somebody else, what language we would be using, and turn that inward, use it on ourselves.
And it could be like, that the technique I come up with the avatar, even giving your inner mind and inner voice, give it something you can picture, maybe the little version of yourself, you as a boy, to have that compassion, try and picture yourself as something. Apologies, we've got some building works going on at the moment. But yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much. I think it's been really good. Really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Dave. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay. And if anybody wants to find you, how can we find you, Mike?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram as the Alcohol-Free Introvert, or on YouTube as Mike Longthorn, Alcohol-Free Performance Coach. And thanks again, Dave. It's been a pleasure. It's been really interesting.
Yeah, it's been really good. Very enjoyable.